Luxury restaurant staff humiliate a black man, mocking his presence. Little do they know this man is a prominent attorney who will use this experience to start powerful actions towards justice. What he did next transformed lives and challenged prejudices in ways they never expected. How did he take revenge? And what was the reaction of the staff when they found out? James Anderson straightened his tie as he approached the entrance of Gourmet Heights Restaurant, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. His heart swelled with a mixture of pride and anticipation. After months of grueling work, he had finally won a landmark civil rights case that would change lives for the better. As he reached for the door handle, James paused, taking a deep breath. He couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, he had always dreamed of making a difference. His parents had instilled in him a deep sense of justice and the importance of standing up for what was right. The one black restaurant staff greeted James with a polite smile. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, for Anderson, party of one," James replied, his voice steady and confident. As he was led to his table, James couldn't help but notice the curious glances from other diners. He was used to being one of the few black faces in places like this, but tonight, he held his head high. He had earned his place here, not just as a customer, but as a champion for equality. Seated at a corner table with a view of the city skyline, James unfolded his napkin and placed it on his lap. The weight of his recent victory settled over him like a warm blanket. He thought of all the people who would benefit from the case he had just won, families who would now have access to better housing, children who would attend better schools, and workers who would have fairer job opportunities. A waiter approached, offering him a menu. "Good evening, sir. May I start you off with something to drink?" James smiled. "Yes, I think I'll have a glass of your finest champagne. I'm celebrating tonight." As the waiter hurried off to fetch his drink, James let his mind wander back to the courtroom. He remembered the tense atmosphere, the sea of faces watching as he delivered his final arguments. The judge's decision had been met with a mix of cheers and angry mutters, but James knew in his heart that justice had been served. The champagne arrived, golden bubbles dancing in the crystal flute. James raised the glass, silently toasting to progress and the long road ahead. He knew that one victory didn't erase centuries of injustice, but it was a step in the right direction. As James savored his champagne, the head restaurant staff, a tall man with graying hair and a crisp black suit, approached his table. The man's eyes swept over James, lingering on his dark skin with a look of barely concealed disdain. "Good evening, sir," the head staff member said, his voice clipped and cold. "I trust everything is satisfactory?" James nodded politely, despite the obvious tension. "Yes, thank you. The champagne is excellent." The man's lips tightened into a thin line. "I see. Well, if you're ready to order, I suppose I can take it myself." His tone suggested this was a great inconvenience. James felt a familiar ache in his chest, one he had experienced many times before. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the victory he was here to celebrate. "I'd like to start with the lobster bisque, please," he said calmly. The head staff member jotted down the order without a word, his pen scratching the paper with unnecessary force. When he finished, he looked at James again, his gaze filled with reluctance and judgment. "Will there be anything else?" he asked, the words coming out more like a challenge than a question. James shook his head. "No, that will be all for now, thank you." The man gave a curt nod and turned on his heel, walking away stiffly. As he left, James overheard him muttering to another staff member, "Keep an eye on that table. Make sure there are no issues." The words stung, but James refused to let them dampen his spirit. He had faced far worse in his fight for justice. Still, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. Even here, in this place of supposed refinement and class, prejudice reared its ugly head. As he waited for his soup, James noticed that the other tables around him were receiving attentive service. Waiters hovered nearby, ready to refill water glasses or offer menu suggestions. His own glass, however, remained empty, and no one approached to check on him. James sat patiently at his table, his fingers lightly tapping the pristine white tablecloth. He watched as waiters bustled around the restaurant, attentively serving other guests with warm smiles and friendly chatter. But when their eyes fell on him, their expressions cooled, and they quickly looked away. He raised his hand, trying to catch someone's attention. A young waiter glanced his way, then promptly turned and walked in the opposite direction. James sighed, his heart heavy with a familiar disappointment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a waiter approached his table. The man's face was set in a tight, unfriendly expression. "Yes?" he asked curtly, not even bothering to make eye contact. "I'd like to order, please," James said politely, despite the waiter's rudeness. "Could I see the menu again?" The waiter huffed impatiently. "Fine," he muttered, walking away to retrieve a menu. When he returned, he practically tossed it onto the table before turning to leave. "Excuse me," James called after him. "I'm ready to order now." The waiter turned back, his eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. James took a deep breath, reminding himself of the countless times he'd faced such treatment. He wouldn't let it ruin his evening. "I'll have the filet mignon, medium rare, please," he said calmly. The waiter scribbled down the order without a word and walked away, leaving James feeling invisible and unwanted. As he waited for his meal, James noticed a couple at a nearby table waving for service. Immediately, 2 waiters rushed over, fawning over them and offering recommendations. The stark contrast to his own treatment was painfully clear. Minutes ticked by and James's water glass remained empty. He watched as other diners had their glasses refilled promptly, their every need catered to with enthusiasm. But when he tried to catch a waiter's eye, they would quickly look away or pretend to be busy with something else. The unfairness of it all weighed heavily on James's heart. He had hoped that his recent victory in court would mark a turning point, that things would start to change. But here he was, still fighting the same battle, even in a place meant for celebration and fine dining. As James sat at his isolated table, the murmur of voices from the kitchen caught his attention. He couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation drifting through the swinging doors. "Can you believe he's still here?" a male voice snickered. "Doesn't he know this place isn't for his kind?" A female voice chimed in, her tone dripping with contempt. "I know, right? Who does he think he is, coming in here like he belongs?" James's heart sank, each word cutting deeper than the last. He had faced discrimination before, but hearing such blatant prejudice in this supposedly upscale establishment left him feeling utterly deflated. Another voice joined the conversation. "Maybe if we ignore him long enough, he'll get the hint and leave." Laughter erupted from the kitchen, the sound of it piercing through James's chest like daggers. He looked down at his empty plate, his appetite completely gone. The celebration he had envisioned for his hard-fought victory now felt hollow and meaningless. With a heavy sigh, James pushed his chair back quietly. He stood up, straightening his suit jacket and holding his head high despite the ache in his heart. As much as he wanted to confront the staff, to demand the respect he deserved, he knew it would only lead to more humiliation. Instead, he decided to leave quietly, his mind already racing with ideas on how to address this injustice. He wouldn't let this experience break him. No, he would use it as fuel for his next fight. As he walked towards the exit, James caught the eye of the polite black staff in the entrance who seemed surprised to see him leaving so soon. Without a word, James nodded politely and stepped out into the cool night air. Standing on the sidewalk, James took a deep breath, letting the city sounds wash over him. The anger and hurt swirled inside him, but he refused to let it consume him. He had fought too hard, come too far to let this setback defeat him. James arrived home, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the evening's events. He loosened his tie and sank into his favorite armchair, the one that had seen him through countless late nights of case preparation. The quiet of his living room was a stark contrast to the bustling restaurant, but the hurtful words still echoed in his mind. As he sat there, memories of past experiences with racial discrimination flooded back. He remembered the sting of rejection when he was a young boy, turned away from a community pool. The frustration of being passed over for promotions early in his career, despite his exceptional work. The countless times he'd been followed in stores, eyed suspiciously for no reason other than the color of his skin. Each memory added to the fire burning in his chest. James had thought things were getting better, that his success as an attorney meant something. But tonight's incident proved that prejudice was still alive and well even in the most unexpected places. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. This time, he wouldn't let it slide. He wouldn't quietly accept the injustice. No, he would use his skills, his knowledge of the law, to fight back. "Enough is enough," James said aloud, his voice firm with resolve. He stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a legal pad. With determination in his eyes, he began to jot down notes, outlining the basis for a lawsuit against the restaurant. As he wrote, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel less than human because of their race. It was about creating a world where everyone could dine in peace regardless of the color of their skin. "I'll see this through," James promised himself. "For all of us who've been silenced, ignored, and disrespected, it's time for change, and I'll be the one to make it happen." The next morning, James woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He called his trusted legal team, scheduling an urgent meeting at his office. As they gathered around the conference table, James shared his experience at the restaurant, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're going to fight this," he declared, looking at each of his colleagues. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been treated this way." His team nodded in agreement, their faces showing a mix of anger and determination. They immediately began strategizing, discussing the best approach to build a strong case against the restaurant. Over the next few weeks, James and his team worked tirelessly. They pored over civil rights laws, examined previous discrimination cases, and gathered evidence. James knew that personal accounts would be crucial in proving a pattern of discriminatory behavior. He reached out to community leaders and civil rights organizations, asking for help in finding others who might have faced similar treatment at the restaurant. Slowly but surely, people began to come forward. James sat across from Sarah, a young black woman who had tried to celebrate her college graduation at the restaurant. Her eyes welled up with tears as she recounted her experience. "They seated us by the kitchen even though the dining room was half empty," she said, her voice trembling. "The waiter barely looked at us, and when he did, his face was full of disgust." James listened intently, his heart heavy but his resolve strengthening with each word. He gently patted Sarah's hand, thanking her for her bravery in sharing her story. Next, he met with Michael, a successful businessman who had a similar experience. "I thought my suit and tie would make a difference," Michael said, shaking his head. "But they still treated me like I didn't belong there." As James interviewed more victims, a clear pattern emerged. The restaurant consistently discriminated against people of color, regardless of their dress or social status. Each account added another piece to the puzzle, strengthening their case against the establishment. Back at the office, James and his team carefully documented each testimony. They created a timeline of incidents, noting the similarities in treatment and the staff members involved. The evidence was mounting, painting a damning picture of the restaurant's practices. As James and his legal team filed the lawsuit against the restaurant, the news spread like wildfire. Local media outlets were quick to pick up the story, and soon it gained national attention. The headlines read, "Prominent attorney fights back against discrimination," and "Civil rights champion takes on luxury restaurant." James found himself thrust into the spotlight, becoming a symbol of resilience and justice. His phone rang off the hook with interview requests from journalists eager to hear his story. He carefully chose which ones to accept, wanting to ensure his message was conveyed accurately and respectfully. During a televised interview, James spoke with passion and dignity. "This isn't just about me," he said, his eyes filled with determination. "It's about every person who has ever been made to feel less than human because of the color of their skin. We deserve better, and we will fight for it." As the story spread, public support for James and his cause grew exponentially. Social media platforms buzzed with messages of encouragement and solidarity. People shared their own experiences with discrimination, inspired by James's courage to speak out. The weight of responsibility settled on James's shoulders. He knew that he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, but for countless others who had faced similar injustices. It was a heavy burden, but one he was willing to bear. At the same time, James felt uplifted by the outpouring of support from his community. Letters and emails flooded his office, each one a testament to the impact of his actions. Local civil rights groups organized rallies in his honor, with people holding signs that read, "Stand with James," and "Justice for All." One evening, as James walked home from his office, an elderly woman approached him on the street. With tears in her eyes, she grasped his hand and said, "Thank you, son. You're fighting for all of us." Her words touched James deeply, reminding him of why he had become a lawyer in the first place. As the case gained national attention, James's inbox began to overflow with messages of support and solidarity from people across the country. Every morning, he would sit at his desk, sipping coffee and reading through the heartfelt emails that poured in. One message in particular caught his eye. It was from a young law student named Lara. She wrote, "Mr. Anderson, your courage inspires me. I'm studying law because I want to make a difference like you. Thank you for showing us the way." James felt a lump in his throat as he read Lara's words. He realized that his fight was giving hope to a new generation of lawyers who dreamed of creating a more just world. Meanwhile, the restaurant owner, Marcus Blackwell, remained defiant in the face of the allegations. He appeared on local news channels, his face set in a scowl as he dismissed James's claims. "This is nothing but a publicity stunt," Blackwell declared, his voice dripping with disdain. "Our restaurant has always provided excellent service to all our customers. Mr. Anderson is simply seeking attention and financial gain." Despite Blackwell's dismissive attitude, public opinion was firmly on James's side. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting the lawsuit, and celebrities began to speak out in James's favor. As James walked to the courthouse one morning, he was greeted by a crowd of supporters. They cheered and waved signs, their voices rising in unison. "Justice for James! Equal rights for all!" The sight brought tears to James's eyes. He felt a mix of emotions: gratitude for the support, determination to see justice done, and a deep sadness that such a fight was still necessary in this day and age. Inside the courtroom, James sat tall and composed, his resolve strengthened by the knowledge that he was fighting not just for himself, but for all those who had ever faced discrimination. As he listened to Blackwell's lawyer make weak excuses and denials, James knew in his heart that truth and justice would prevail. As the trial date approached, James immersed himself in preparation. He spent long hours in his office, poring over legal documents and case precedents. The weight of the upcoming trial pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he knew this case was about more than just one incident at a restaurant. It was about confronting the deep-rooted issue of systemic racial discrimination. Late one evening, as James sat at his desk surrounded by stacks of papers, his eyes fell on a framed photograph of his parents. Their warm smiles seemed to radiate strength and encouragement. He picked up the frame, running his fingers over the glass as memories flooded his mind. James remembered his father's deep, reassuring voice. "Son," he would say, "there will be times when the world isn't fair. But that's when you must stand tallest." His mother's gentle wisdom echoed in his thoughts too. "Your voice matters, James. Use it to speak for those who can't." These lessons from his childhood had shaped James into the man he was today. He closed his eyes, drawing strength from the love and wisdom his parents had instilled in him. Their words became a mantra, fueling his determination to fight not just for himself, but for every person who had ever faced discrimination. James turned back to his work with renewed vigor. He carefully crafted his arguments, weaving together personal experiences with legal precedents. Each word he wrote was infused with the passion for justice that had been nurtured in him since childhood. As dawn broke, James stood up and stretched, his body stiff from hours of work. He walked to the window and looked out at the city waking up. The streets below were beginning to fill with people going about their daily lives. James thought about how many of them might have faced similar discrimination, silently bearing the pain and humiliation. "This case is for all of you," he whispered, pressing his hand against the cool glass. "For everyone who's ever been made to feel less than human because of the color of their skin." With a deep breath, James turned back to his desk. There was still much work to be done, but he felt ready for the challenge ahead. He knew that win or lose, this trial would be a step towards the justice and equality his parents had always taught him to fight for. The day of the trial arrived and the courthouse buzzed with anticipation. James stood tall as he entered the courtroom, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshakable. The room fell silent as he approached the podium, ready to present his case. With a deep breath, James began his opening statement. His voice, clear and strong, filled the courtroom as he recounted the painful experience at the restaurant. He spoke not just of his own humiliation, but of a broader pattern of discrimination that had gone unchecked for far too long. "Your Honor," James said, his eyes scanning the room, "this case is about more than one man's experience. It's about a systemic issue that affects countless individuals every day." As the trial progressed, James called forth a series of witnesses. Each testimony painted a vivid picture of the restaurant's discriminatory practices. A young woman, her voice trembling with emotion, described being seated near the kitchen despite empty tables by the window. An elderly gentleman recounted how he was repeatedly ignored by the staff, while other patrons received prompt service. The courtroom was hushed as these stories unfolded, the air heavy with the weight of shared pain and injustice. James watched as the jurors' expressions shifted from skepticism to shock, and finally to understanding. Expert witnesses took the stand, presenting statistical evidence that showed a clear pattern of discrimination at the restaurant. They explained how such practices not only violated the law, but also perpetuated harmful societal norms. Throughout the proceedings, James maintained his composure, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the restaurant owner's growing discomfort. The defense's attempts to discredit the witnesses fell flat in the face of such compelling evidence. As the day wore on, it became clear that James's case was making a strong impact. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, while members of the public gallery whispered among themselves, clearly moved by the testimonies. As the trial progressed, James faced both overwhelming support and fierce resistance. The courtroom became a battleground of emotions and testimonies, with James standing firm at the center of it all. The defense attorney, a sharp-tongued woman in a crisp suit, tried her best to discredit the witnesses. She questioned their memories, suggesting that perhaps they had misinterpreted innocent actions as discrimination. But James remained composed, his face a mask of calm determination. "Mr. Anderson," the defense attorney said, her voice dripping with skepticism, "isn't it possible that you were simply having a bad day and misread the situation?" James took a deep breath before responding. "No, ma'am," he said firmly. "What I experienced that day was unmistakable discrimination. It wasn't the first time I'd faced such treatment, but I decided it would be the last time I stayed silent about it." His words resonated through the courtroom, drawing nods of agreement from many spectators. Even some of the jurors seemed moved by his sincerity. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered daily, holding signs that read, "Justice for James" and "End Discrimination Now." Their presence bolstered James's spirits, reminding him of the importance of his fight. But not everyone was on his side. James received anonymous threats and faced harsh criticism from those who claimed he was overreacting or seeking attention. These moments tested his resolve, but he drew strength from the memory of his parents' teachings and the support of his community. Throughout it all, James remained focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about him or even just about the restaurant. It was about challenging a system that had allowed discrimination to persist for far too long. As each day of the trial passed, James felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that the outcome of this case could set a precedent for future discrimination lawsuits. But rather than feeling burdened, he felt empowered. This was his chance to make a real difference, to stand up not just for himself, but for all those who had ever faced similar treatment. As the trial continued, media coverage of the case intensified. News vans lined the streets outside the courthouse, and reporters jostled for position, eager to catch a glimpse of James as he arrived each morning. The story had captured the nation's attention, bringing the issue of racial discrimination in upscale establishments to the forefront of public discourse. James's calm and articulate demeanor during press conferences and interviews won over many supporters. He spoke with passion and clarity about his experiences, never losing his composure even when faced with difficult questions. "This case isn't just about me. James told a group of reporters one afternoon. "It's about every person who has ever been made to feel less than human because of the color of their skin. We deserve better, and we're fighting for that better future." His words resonated with people across the country. Social media buzzed with discussions about racial equality and the prevalence of discrimination in everyday life. Hashtags like "Justice for James" and "End Discrimination" trended for days on end. Television talk shows invited experts to discuss the case and its broader implications. Many shared their own stories of discrimination, inspired by James's bravery in speaking out. The conversation was sometimes uncomfortable, but it was necessary. As public interest grew, so did the pressure on the restaurant. Its once stellar reputation was now tarnished, with many former patrons expressing shock and disappointment at the allegations. Some even organized boycotts, vowing not to return until the establishment addressed its discriminatory practices. Through it all, James remained focused on the trial. He understood the power of the media spotlight, but was careful not to let it distract him from the task at hand. Each day, he entered the courtroom with determination, ready to continue his fight for justice. During a recess in the trial, James stepped out of the bustling courthouse and found a quiet spot in a nearby park. He sat on a weathered wooden bench, the same one he'd often visited during difficult cases. The familiar surroundings brought a sense of calm, and his mind drifted to thoughts of his parents. James closed his eyes and could almost hear his father's deep, reassuring voice. "Son," he would say, "no matter what life throws at you, always hold your head high. Your dignity is not something anyone can take from you." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, reminding James of the countless evenings spent on the porch with his mother. Her words echoed in his mind. "Perseverance is the key, James. The road may be long and hard, but if you keep moving forward, you'll reach your destination." These lessons had been the bedrock of James's life, guiding him through countless challenges. Now, as he faced one of the biggest fights of his career, their wisdom seemed more relevant than ever. James opened his eyes and gazed at the park around him. Children played on the swings, their laughter carried on the wind. Nearby, an elderly couple walked hand in hand, smiling at each other. These simple scenes of everyday life reminded James of why his fight was so important. He was working to create a world where everyone could enjoy these moments without fear or prejudice. As he sat there, James's phone buzzed with messages of support from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had been moved by his story. Each message was a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. The community had rallied around him, their collective voice growing stronger with each passing day. Drawing strength from these thoughts, James stood up, ready to return to the courtroom. The trial was far from over, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His parents' lessons, combined with the support of his community, had reignited his determination. As the defense lawyer presented their counterarguments, James felt a momentary wave of doubt wash over him. The attorney's words were smooth and persuasive, painting a picture of misunderstanding rather than discrimination. For a brief instant, James wondered if he had overreacted, if his case wasn't as strong as he had believed. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. The courtroom faded away, and in his mind, he saw the faces of those who had shared their stories with him. There was Melly, a young black woman who had been denied service at the restaurant's bar. He remembered the pain in her eyes as she recounted how the bartender had ignored her, serving white patrons who had arrived after her. Then there was Clark, an elderly gentleman who had been seated near the kitchen, despite the restaurant being nearly empty. The man's voice had trembled as he described feeling like a second-class citizen in a place where he should have been welcomed. James recalled Lisa, a successful businesswoman who had been asked to prepay for her meal while her white colleagues were not. The humiliation she felt was still raw in her voice as she shared her experience. These stories, and dozens more like them, came flooding back to James. Each one was a testament to the pervasive discrimination that still existed, each a reminder of why this fight was so crucial. Opening his eyes, James felt his resolve strengthen. He looked at the jury, seeing a mix of emotions on their faces. Some seemed swayed by the defense's arguments, while others appeared skeptical. James knew that his next move would be critical. As he stood to begin his rebuttal, James felt a calm determination settle over him. The doubt that had momentarily clouded his mind dissipated, replaced by a clear sense of purpose. He was not just fighting for himself, but for Melly, Clark, Lisa, and countless others who had faced similar treatment. As James prepared to deliver his rebuttal, a commotion at the back of the courtroom caught everyone's attention. The judge called for order, and a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a simple but elegant suit, made her way to the front. "Your Honor," James's co-counsel said, rising quickly. "We have a last-minute witness who has come forward. She's a former employee of the restaurant and has crucial testimony to offer." The judge raised an eyebrow, considering the request. After a brief sidebar with both legal teams, he allowed the witness to take the stand. "Please state your name for the court," James asked, his heart pounding with unexpected hope. "Melissa Johnson," the woman replied, her voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "Ms. Johnson, can you tell us about your employment at the defendant's restaurant?" Melissa took a deep breath. "I worked there as a server for 3 years until 6 months ago." As Melissa began to speak, the courtroom fell into a hushed silence. She described a pattern of discriminatory practices that she had witnessed and, at times, been forced to participate in. "We were instructed to seat black customers in less visible areas," Melissa said, her voice quivering slightly. "If the restaurant was busy, we were told to tell them there were no available tables, even if that wasn't true." James listened intently, his heart heavy but his resolve strengthened. Melissa's testimony painted a damning picture of systematic discrimination that went beyond isolated incidents. "Did you ever raise concerns about these practices?" James asked gently. Melissa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I did once. I was told that it was just business and that if I couldn't handle it, I should leave. I needed the job, so I stayed silent after that. But I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. That's why I'm here today." The defense attorney's objections were overruled, and Melissa's testimony continued. She provided dates, specific incidents, and even names of other employees who had participated in the discriminatory practices. As Melissa spoke, James could see the jury's expressions changing. The doubt that had been present earlier was replaced by shock and dismay. Her testimony was not just corroborating the experiences of the patrons. It was revealing a deeply ingrained culture of discrimination within the restaurant. As the trial neared its conclusion, James and his legal team worked tirelessly to prepare for their closing arguments. The long nights and intense discussions were fueled by a shared sense of purpose and the weight of responsibility they carried. One evening, as they pored over documents and rehearsed key points, James's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the National Civil Rights Coalition, expressing their support and offering additional resources for the case. James read the message aloud to his team, his voice filled with emotion. "This isn't just about us anymore," he said, looking around at the tired but determined faces of his colleagues. "It's about everyone who has ever faced discrimination and felt powerless to fight back." The team nodded in agreement, their spirits lifted by the reminder of the broader impact of their work. They redoubled their efforts, fine-tuning their arguments and anticipating potential rebuttals from the defense. As word spread about the case, more civil rights organizations reached out to offer their support. Letters and emails poured in, each one a testament to the importance of their fight. James pinned some of these messages on the office wall, creating a collage of encouragement that served as a constant reminder of why they were working so hard. One afternoon, as they took a brief break from their preparations, Rika, one of the junior attorneys on the team, spoke up. "You know, when I first joined this case, I was worried we might be in over our heads. But seeing all this support, it's like we've got an entire community behind us." James smiled, feeling a surge of pride in his team and gratitude for the support they'd received. "That's exactly it, Rika. We're not just fighting for ourselves or even just for the people who were turned away from that restaurant. We're fighting for everyone who believes in equality and justice." The team's morale soared as they realized the true scope of their work. They weren't just preparing legal arguments, they were crafting a message of hope and change that would resonate far beyond the courtroom. The day of closing arguments arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. James stood at the podium, his heart pounding but his resolve unwavering. He took a deep breath, looked at the jury, and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," James started, his voice clear and strong. "Over the past weeks, you've heard testimony after testimony about the discrimination that took place at the Starlight restaurant. But this case is about more than just one restaurant or one incident. It's about the very fabric of our society and the values we hold dear." James paused, letting his words sink in. He could feel the weight of every eye in the courtroom on him. "I stand before you not just as an attorney, but as a man who has experienced the sting of discrimination firsthand. On that night at the Starlight restaurant, I wasn't seen as James Anderson, a respected lawyer celebrating a hard-won victory. I was judged solely by the color of my skin." His voice grew more passionate as he continued. "But my experience is not unique. You've heard from others who faced similar treatment. People who were made to feel less than human simply because of their race. This isn't just about hurt feelings or bad service, it's about dignity, respect, and the fundamental right to be treated equally." James walked slowly in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. The defense would have you believe that this was all a misunderstanding, a series of coincidences. But the evidence tells a different story. It tells of a pattern of behavior, a culture of discrimination that has no place in our society. He paused again, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. "Your decision today isn't just about one restaurant or one group of people. It's about what kind of community we want to be. Do we want to be a place where people are judged by their character or by the color of their skin? Do we want to be a society that turns a blind eye to injustice, or one that stands up and says, 'This is not right, and we won't allow it'?" James's voice grew softer but no less intense. "I ask you to consider not just the legal arguments, but the human cost of discrimination. Think about the people who testified, the hurt in their voices, the dignity they were denied. And then I ask you to send a message not just to the Starlight restaurant, but to our entire community, that discrimination has no place here." As the jury filed out to deliberate, James felt a wave of nervous energy wash over him. He sat on a bench outside the courtroom, surrounded by a group of supporters who had come to stand with him during this crucial moment. The hallway buzzed with quiet conversation as people shared their own experiences with discrimination. An elderly woman with kind eyes placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "You know, son," she said softly, "what you're doing here reminds me of the sit-ins we used to do back in the day. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." James nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Thank you for being here," he managed to say. A young man in his 20s spoke up next. "Mr. Anderson, I faced something similar at a job interview last year. They took one look at me and suddenly the position was filled. Your case gives me hope that things can change." As more stories poured out, James felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders grow heavier. Each tale of injustice, each account of dignity denied, reinforced the importance of what they were fighting for. Hours ticked by slowly. James paced the hallway, his mind racing with thoughts of the trial. He replayed every moment, every piece of evidence presented. Had they done enough? Would the jury see the truth? A young woman approached him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice trembling, "I just wanted to thank you. My little brother is watching this case closely. He wants to be a lawyer like you someday. You're showing him it's possible." James felt a surge of emotion. He thought of his own journey, the obstacles he'd faced, and the people who had paved the way for him. Now he was doing the same for others. As the wait stretched on, tension in the hallway grew. People spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously at the courtroom doors. James tried to stay calm, but he could feel his heart racing. The tension in the hallway reached its peak as the bailiff emerged from the courtroom. "The jury has reached a verdict," he announced solemnly. James took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt the reassuring touch of his supporters as they gathered around him, offering silent strength. With steady steps, he walked back into the courtroom, his head held high. As the judge called the court to order, James sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. The room fell into a hushed silence, the air thick with anticipation. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" the judge asked. The foreperson stood, her voice clear and strong. "We have, Your Honor." James closed his eyes for a moment, sending up a silent prayer. When he opened them, he saw the faces of those who had stood with him throughout this journey, his legal team, the witnesses who had bravely shared their stories, and the supporters who had rallied behind his cause. "In the matter of Anderson versus Gourmet Heights Restaurant, we find in favor of the plaintiff, James Anderson," the foreperson announced. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs of relief and joy. James sat stunned for a moment, barely registering the words he had longed to hear. The judge's voice cut through the noise. "The court orders Gourmet Heights Restaurant to pay substantial damages in the amount of $500,000 to Mr. Anderson and other affected parties. Furthermore, the restaurant is mandated to implement a comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training program for all staff members, to be overseen by an independent civil rights organization." As the reality of the verdict sank in, James felt a mix of emotions wash over him: relief, vindication, and a profound sense of responsibility. He turned to his legal team, tears glistening in his eyes, and embraced them one by one. The courtroom erupted in applause, the sound of justice being served echoing off the walls. James stood, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. He saw tears of joy on the faces of those who had shared their own stories of discrimination, their hope for change now realized. The news of James's victory spread like wildfire across the nation. As he stepped out of the courthouse, he was met with a sea of cheering supporters, their faces beaming with joy and hope. Cameras flashed and reporters clamored for a statement. James stood tall, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "Today, we've taken a step towards a more just and equal society. This victory isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever faced discrimination and stood up against it." The media coverage was extensive, with news anchors and commentators praising James's courage and perseverance. Headlines across the country declared, "Civil rights attorney wins landmark case against discriminatory restaurant." On national television, a respected journalist said, "This ruling sends a powerful message that discrimination has no place in our society, no matter how exclusive or upscale the establishment may be." Social media platforms buzzed with activity, as people shared their own stories of discrimination and expressed gratitude for James's bravery. The hashtag #GuideYardJustice served trended nationwide, with millions of posts celebrating the victory. Civil rights organizations hailed the ruling as a significant milestone. The president of the National Civil Rights Coalition stated, "James Anderson's case reminds us that the fight for equality is ongoing, and that one person's courage can make a difference for many." In the days that followed, James received invitations to speak at universities, civil rights events, and even on popular talk shows. He used these platforms to emphasize the importance of standing up against injustice and working towards a more inclusive society. The impact of the case reached far beyond the courtroom. Other restaurants and businesses across the country began reviewing their policies and implementing diversity training programs, eager to avoid similar lawsuits and to create more welcoming environments for all customers. In the wake of the landmark ruling, Marcus Blackwell, the owner of the upscale restaurant at the center of the discrimination lawsuit, found himself at a crossroads. Initially defiant and dismissive of James's allegations, he now watched in awe as the nation rallied behind the civil rights attorney. As the days passed, Marcus couldn't escape the overwhelming public support for James and the growing demand for justice. Everywhere he turned, he saw news coverage of the trial, social media posts celebrating the verdict, and impassioned discussions about equality and inclusivity. One evening, as Marcus sat in his dimly lit office, he picked up a stack of letters that had been flooding in. With trembling hands, he opened one after another, reading heartfelt stories from people who had faced discrimination in restaurants just like his. Their words pierced through his defenses, touching a part of his heart he didn't know existed. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he realized the pain and humiliation his establishment had caused. The weight of his actions and the responsibility he bore crashed down upon him. In that moment, he knew he had to make things right. The next morning, Marcus called a press conference. As cameras flashed and reporters waited with bated breath, he stepped up to the microphone. His voice shaky but determined, he began, "I stand before you today to offer my sincerest apologies to Mr. James Anderson and to every person who has ever felt unwelcome or discriminated against in my restaurant." Marcus paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I was wrong. My actions and the culture I allowed to flourish in my establishment were inexcusable. Today, I commit to making my restaurant a model for inclusivity and respect." The room fell silent as Marcus outlined his plans for change. He announced comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training for all staff, the creation of a scholarship program for aspiring chefs from underrepresented communities, and a partnership with local civil rights organizations to ensure ongoing accountability. As he spoke, Marcus's voice grew stronger, fueled by a newfound determination to be part of the solution rather than the problem. "This is just the beginning," he declared. "I invite Mr. Anderson and community leaders to work with us as we strive to become an example of what a truly inclusive establishment can be." James watched the press conference with a mixture of surprise and hope. He had never expected such a sincere apology from Marcus Blackwell, the restaurant owner who had once been his adversary. As Marcus outlined his plans for change, James felt a stirring in his heart, a desire to help make those plans a reality. The next day, James reached out to Marcus's office. When they connected on the phone, James spoke with warmth and sincerity. "Mr. Blackwell, I was moved by your words yesterday. I believe in second chances, and I'd like to offer my help in implementing these changes." Marcus was taken aback by James's generosity. His voice cracked with emotion as he replied, "Mr. Anderson, I don't deserve your kindness, but I would be honored to work with you." Over the following weeks, James and Marcus met regularly at the restaurant. They walked through the dining room, kitchen, and staff areas, discussing ways to create a more welcoming environment for all. James shared his experiences and insights, helping Marcus see his establishment through new eyes. Together, they developed a comprehensive training program for the staff. James brought in experts from civil rights organizations to lead workshops on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. The employees, at first wary, soon embraced the opportunity to learn and grow. Marcus, inspired by James's dedication, went above and beyond his initial promises. He hired a diverse group of talented chefs and staff members, giving opportunities to those who had been overlooked in the past. The menu was expanded to include dishes from various cultures, celebrating the rich diversity of their city. As the changes took shape, the restaurant began to transform. The once cold and unwelcoming atmosphere gave way to warmth and inclusivity. Customers from all walks of life felt valued and respected, and word spread about the positive changes taking place. One evening, as James and Marcus sat at a corner table, reviewing their progress, Marcus turned to James with tears in his eyes. "I can't thank you enough for giving me this chance to make things right," he said softly. "You've shown me what true leadership and forgiveness look like." James smiled, his own eyes glistening. "This is what happens when we come together, Marcus. We all have the power to create positive change, no matter where we start from." As the weeks turned into months, the restaurant underwent a remarkable transformation. The once exclusive establishment became a beacon of inclusivity and diversity in the community. James and Marcus worked tirelessly to implement comprehensive diversity training programs that went far beyond surface-level changes. The staff, initially hesitant, began to embrace the new inclusive culture wholeheartedly. They participated in regular workshops that explored topics like cultural sensitivity, unconscious bias, and the importance of creating a welcoming environment for all guests. These sessions weren't just lectures. They included interactive role-playing exercises and open discussions that allowed employees to share their own experiences and perspectives. Marcus, inspired by James's dedication, took the initiative to start community outreach programs. The restaurant began hosting monthly community dinner events, where local organizations representing different cultural groups were invited to showcase their cuisine and traditions. These dinners quickly became popular, drawing diverse crowds and fostering understanding among people from all walks of life. The staff's enthusiasm for these changes was evident in their interactions with guests. They took pride in learning about different cultures and cuisines, often sharing interesting facts with patrons. The head restaurant staff, who had once been dismissive of James, now greeted every guest with genuine warmth and respect. He even started learning phrases in various languages to make international visitors feel more welcome. In the kitchen, head chef Miguel embraced the opportunity to expand the menu. He collaborated with local immigrant-owned businesses to source authentic ingredients and invited guest chefs from diverse backgrounds to create special fusion dishes. The restaurant's menu became a celebration of global flavors, reflecting the rich tapestry of cultures in their city. The impact of these changes rippled out into the community. Other local businesses took notice and began reaching out to James and Marcus for advice on implementing their own diversity initiatives. The restaurant became a model for how a business could transform itself and positively impact society. As the staff witnessed the positive changes and the growing sense of community within the restaurant, they began to take ownership of the inclusive culture. They started organizing their own diversity events, like cultural exchange potlucks and language exchange meetups. The once cold workplace had become a warm, supportive family where everyone felt valued and respected. The day of the restaurant's grand reopening arrived, filled with anticipation and excitement. The community buzzed with curiosity, eager to witness the positive changes that had taken place. James, dressed in his best suit, felt a mix of emotions as he approached the familiar building. He took a deep breath, remembering the journey that had brought him to this moment. As James walked through the doors, he was greeted by a sight that warmed his heart. The once cold and unwelcoming space had been transformed into a vibrant celebration of diversity. Colorful artwork from local artists adorned the walls, representing various cultures and traditions. The air was filled with the enticing aromas of dishes from around the world. Marcus, the restaurant owner, rushed forward to greet James with a warm handshake and a genuine smile. "James, we can't thank you enough for being here tonight," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've helped us create something truly special." James looked around, taking in the diverse crowd that had gathered for the event. People from all walks of life mingled together, their laughter and animated conversations creating a joyful atmosphere. He spotted familiar faces, community leaders, civil rights activists, and even some of the witnesses from the trial. They nodded at him with respect and admiration. As James made his way through the room, he was stopped by the restaurant staff who had once treated him with disdain. His eyes were filled with tears as she spoke. "Mr. Anderson, I want to apologize for how I treated you before. This experience has opened my eyes, and I'm so grateful for the chance to learn and grow." James was touched by her sincerity. He placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and said, "Thank you. Your willingness to change is what makes all of this worthwhile." The evening continued with speeches from Marcus and community leaders, all praising the restaurant's transformation and James's role in making it happen. When it was James's turn to speak, he stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, all different, yet united in their hope for a better future. As James stood at the podium, he felt a surge of emotion. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice steady and heartfelt. "Good evening, everyone. What we see here tonight is more than just a restaurant reopening. It's a symbol of change, of growth, and of hope." The crowd listened intently, their faces showing a mix of emotions: pride, joy, and determination. James continued, "This journey has taught us all that when we stand together against injustice, we can create real change." As James finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. Marcus then invited everyone to enjoy the evening and experience the new menu. The doors to the dining area opened, revealing tables adorned with elegant centerpieces representing different cultures. The staff, dressed in crisp uniforms, moved through the crowd with grace and professionalism. Saul, now the head hostess, greeted each guest with a warm smile and genuine welcome. She made sure that everyone, regardless of their appearance or background, was seated comfortably and treated with respect. In the kitchen, Chef Maria, a talented cook who had been hired as part of the restaurant's new inclusive hiring policy, expertly prepared dishes from various cuisines. The aromas of spices and herbs filled the air, enticing the guests. James watched as people from all walks of life sat together, sharing meals and conversations. He saw a young interracial couple being served by Tom, a waiter who had once been dismissive of James. Now, Tom was attentive and courteous, ensuring the couple had everything they needed. At a nearby table, an elderly African-American woman was dining with her granddaughter. The woman caught James's eye and nodded, a look of gratitude and understanding passing between them. James knew she had likely faced similar struggles in her lifetime. As the evening progressed, the restaurant buzzed with lively chatter and laughter. The staff moved efficiently between tables, their faces showing genuine enjoyment in their work. They took time to explain dishes, make recommendations, and ensure that every guest felt valued and respected. James felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Marcus, his eyes shining with pride and emotion. "James," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "look at what we've created together. This is more than I ever could have imagined." As the evening drew to a close, James made his way back to the podium. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the man who had made this transformation possible. James took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the diverse crowd before him. "Before we end this wonderful night," he began, his voice warm and sincere, "I want to share a few more thoughts with you all." James paused, collecting his emotions. "Tonight we've witnessed the power of forgiveness and understanding. We've seen how standing up for what's right can lead to real, positive change." He gestured to Marcus, who stood nearby with tears in his eyes. "Marcus and I started as adversaries, but we end as partners in progress. This journey has taught us that when we open our hearts to understanding, miracles can happen." The room was hushed, hanging on James's every word. It would have been easy to hold on to anger and resentment, but by choosing forgiveness, we've created something beautiful, a place where everyone is welcome, where dignity and respect are served alongside the food. James's voice grew stronger, filled with passion. "This restaurant is now a symbol of what's possible when we stand up for what's right. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it." He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as he could. "I want to challenge each of you to carry this spirit of forgiveness and understanding into your daily lives. Stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Reach out to those who are different from you. Listen to their stories. Learn from them." James's words resonated deeply with everyone present. Many nodded in agreement, some wiped away tears. The atmosphere in the room was electric with emotion and shared purpose. "Remember," James concluded, his voice filled with hope, "change starts with each one of us. Let's leave here tonight not just with full stomachs, but with full hearts, hearts ready to forgive, to understand, and to stand up for what's right. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." As James finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. His words had touched something deep within each person present, inspiring them to carry the message of forgiveness, understanding, and justice beyond the walls of the restaurant. As the applause for James's speech died down, a hush fell over the crowd. One by one, former victims of discrimination at the restaurant stood up to share their stories. Their voices, once silenced by prejudice, now rang out with clarity and purpose. An elderly woman, her silver hair neatly pinned back, spoke first. "I remember coming here for my 50th wedding anniversary," she said, her voice quivering with emotion. "We were turned away at the door. Today I stand here welcomed and respected. It's a beautiful change." A young man in a wheelchair rolled forward. "I was told they couldn't accommodate me," he shared. "Now look at the accessible seating and ramps. It's not just about race. It's about treating everyone with dignity." As each person spoke, a sense of unity blossomed in the room. Tears were shed, hands were held, and understanding deepened. These weren't just stories of pain. They were testimonies of resilience and hope. A middle-aged woman stood up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I brought my daughter here last week," she said. "The same staff who once ignored us now treated her like a princess. That's the power of change." The restaurant owner, who had been listening intently, stood up. His face was etched with remorse and gratitude. "I don't have the words to express how sorry I am for the pain my establishment caused," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "But I am incredibly grateful for this opportunity to make amends." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had shared their stories. "Your courage in speaking out and your willingness to give us another chance has transformed not just this restaurant, but all of us who work here. We've learned that true hospitality means welcoming everyone with open arms and open hearts." The owner turned to James, extending his hand. "Mr. Anderson, thank you for pushing us to be better. Your fight for justice has given us the chance to right our wrongs and create a place where everyone truly belongs." As James shook the owner's hand, a wave of applause swept through the room. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of hope and unity. It was clear to everyone present that this wasn't just about a restaurant changing its ways, it was about a community coming together to forge a more inclusive future. In the weeks following the restaurant's reopening, James and the owner, Marcus, found themselves deep in conversation about the transformative power of their experience. They realized that their story could inspire change far beyond the walls of one establishment. "You know, James," Marcus said one afternoon as they sat in the newly renovated dining room, "I can't help but think about all the other businesses out there that might be stuck in the same mindset I was." James nodded thoughtfully. "It's a widespread issue, but now we have a blueprint for change." That conversation sparked an idea that would soon blossom into a nationwide initiative. James and Marcus decided to join forces, combining James's legal expertise and passion for equality with Marcus's business acumen and newfound commitment to inclusivity. They called their initiative Open Doors, Open Hearts, and set out to provide diversity training to establishments across the country. The program was designed to help businesses recognize and address unconscious biases, implement inclusive practices, and create welcoming environments for all patrons. James took the lead in developing the legal and ethical framework for the training, drawing from his years of experience in civil rights law. Marcus focused on the practical aspects of implementation, using his restaurant as a case study to demonstrate the positive impact of inclusive policies on both the community and the bottom line. Their partnership was unexpected but powerful. James's calm, articulate manner complemented Marcus's energetic enthusiasm. Together, they created a compelling narrative of transformation and redemption that resonated with business owners across the spectrum. As word of their initiative spread, invitations began pouring in from chambers of commerce, business associations, and individual establishments. James and Marcus found themselves crisscrossing the country, sharing their story and leading workshops on inclusive business practices. In a small town in the Midwest, they worked with a family-owned diner that had been struggling with changing demographics. In a bustling city on the West Coast, they helped a chain of boutique hotels revamp their hiring and customer service policies. Each workshop was a journey of discovery and growth. James and Marcus watched as skepticism turned to understanding, and understanding blossomed into commitment. They saw firsthand how their personal story of conflict and reconciliation could open hearts and minds. The transformed restaurant quickly became a symbol of hope and progress in the community. People from all walks of life flocked to the establishment, drawn by its reputation for excellent food and inclusive atmosphere. The diverse mix of patrons created a vibrant energy that filled the air with laughter and animated conversations. James often found himself at the restaurant not just as a customer, but as a living example of the change that was possible when people came together with open hearts and minds. He would sit at the bar, sipping a glass of iced tea, and chat with anyone who approached him. His warm smile and gentle demeanor made him approachable to all. One evening, a young law student named Mara hesitantly approached James. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I've been following your case and your work. You've inspired me to pursue civil rights law." James's eyes crinkled with warmth as he gestured for Mara to take a seat next to him. "I'm honored to hear that, Mara. Tell me, what drew you to this path?" As Mara shared her story, James listened intently, nodding and offering words of encouragement. This scene became a common occurrence at the restaurant. Young lawyers and activists sought out James, eager to learn from his experiences and gain insights into the fight for equality. Recognizing the impact he could have on the next generation, James began organizing regular mentorship sessions at the restaurant. He would reserve a large table in the corner, and aspiring changemakers would gather around, notebooks in hand, ready to soak up every word of wisdom he had to offer. During these sessions, James shared not only the legal strategies that had proven effective, but also the personal resilience required to face adversity. He emphasized the importance of compassion, even in the face of discrimination, and the power of perseverance in the long fight for justice. "Remember," he would often say, his voice filled with conviction, "our goal isn't just to win cases, it's to change hearts and minds. That's how we create lasting change." The restaurant became more than just a place to eat. It transformed into a hub of learning and inspiration. The owner, Marcus, fully embraced this new role, often joining James's sessions to share his perspective on the business side of implementing inclusive practices. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow through the restaurant's large windows, James and Marcus stood side by side, surveying the bustling establishment they had worked so hard to transform. The air was filled with the gentle clinking of cutlery, the soft murmur of conversation, and occasional bursts of laughter. James turned to Marcus, a smile playing on his lips. "You know, when I first walked into this place all those months ago, I never could have imagined we'd end up here." Marcus nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and determination. "I'm just thankful you gave me the chance to make things right, James. You could have easily written me off as another lost cause." "That's not my style," James chuckled softly. "I've always believed in the power of second chances and the capacity for people to change." They watched as a diverse group of patrons enjoyed their meals, the staff moving among them with genuine warmth and respect. The scene before them was a testament to what could be achieved when people came together with open hearts and minds. "We've come a long way," Marcus mused, "but there's still so much work to be done out there." James nodded, his expression becoming serious. "You're right. This is just the beginning. But look at what we've accomplished here. It's proof that positive change is possible." As they stood there, united in their commitment to making a positive impact, a sense of hope filled the air. It was palpable, as real as the aromas wafting from the kitchen or the smiles on the faces of the diners. "Ready to take on the world?" James asked, extending his hand to Marcus. Marcus grasped it firmly, a look of determination in his eyes. "Together, I think we just might be able to make a difference." As they shook hands, the setting sun bathed the restaurant in a warm golden light, symbolizing the dawn of a new era, one of understanding, inclusivity, and hope for a better future. Do you believe Marcus's change of heart was genuine after working with James? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I am spending hours upon hours writing these heartwarming stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going.